here.
he just gets into the details of all the excrement, all the different, the vomit. I just had to put it down. I was like, I was young and I was like, I've never anything like this. I was all lightheaded and nauseous. I was like, I've never read, where was this?
This was a whole revelation to me. Hi, welcome back to Gotta Be Me podcast. We're so happy to be here again with you today. We are your hosts. My name is Sophia Banyan, and this is my cousin Peyton Banyan.
Welcome back, everybody. We're here today. We're wearing green again. If you're new here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll appreciate it so much.
What was with the green thing?
Oh.
Anyway, I do have to tell you, so in the comments, somebody said, refer to Peyton as the cousin. And Peyton was like, why do I have to be the cousin? Sophia's a cousin
She's
too.
a cousin too.
Well, I think it's because I always introduce her as Peyton, my cousin, right? But I tried to get her to introduce and it didn't happen. So she gets to be the cousin. Today we want to talk about another book that changed our lives. This was a major one for me, at least. I was pretty young when I read it, so I feel like the impact was even like early teens, but still it was like really heavy. And that is this book, Roots by Alex Haley. Alex Haley is a wonderful author. He wrote the book we talked about, Malcolm X, or helped Malcolm X write it. He wrote, you can see this book on our shelf, Queen. I have another book by him called Mama Flora's Family. So I love all his books, but Roots is definitely, one of his number one books and most famous.
And there was a movie produced from it.
Right. And this book, I have not seen the movie before. Have you?
I have not either.
So please post in the comment sections if you think it's worth watching. Short version, long version, like what we should see. The book was definitely a life-changing read, and I would love to know if the movie's good too. Anyway, let's get into it. How Roots changed our lives. Do you want to go first?
Sure, why not? So I think growing up, my parents provided me with tons of books. And so I feel like even though I was sheltered, I had a pretty good education, a pretty well-rounded education, reading lots of books, different things here and there. But I feel like, when you're younger, you read like a certain level of books. And then I feel like this was my get older level of book. So I had always read, those thin chapter books about the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman helping thousands of slaves to
and
freedom.
People running.
And in the books, children's books, they always make it to the other side. They always get to the freedom, right? So
and not only that, but it's all a little bit toned down. Like, I mean, it sounds horrible still. I mean, it's slavery or they're getting beaten.
I remember my little American Girl doll books about Addie. I would be so horrified, right? The slave master made her eat worms. Yes. And I was just like, that is a traumatizing image
for me too.
But yeah, you kind of get this image of slavery in your head, and this book snapped me out of it.
It was like a wake-up call.
I'd never read anything like it, and I didn't even realize slavery was like this.
I have to say that even after reading, so I read Uncle Tom's Cabin when I was like 10 or something.
Yeah.
And again, that changed my life as a child because I'd never read anything like that. But this was a whole nother level. To me, that was mild compared to this.
It kind of snaps you out of the fairy tale that you're just thinking about slavery. I remember a part that really stuck out to me is when they were on the slave ships. He just gets into the details of all the excrement, all the different, the vomit, the flux, when they had the flux. I remember them talking about getting seawater thrown in their festering wounds, and I just remember being like, hold up, this is a whole nother story than what I've heard, and me just realizing this is what really went down.
I feel the same way. Of course you hear about, or you read about, the slave ships, and they would say, the conditions were terrible and they brought over and many got sick and died, but until you have a picture like this painted for you, you can't really begin to imagine how horrible it was. And to me, this was like a whole, I remember I was in the dark reading, it was nighttime, and kind of shaking while I was reading it, what is this? That what book have I found?
I was in the middle of a serious part, and I just had to put it down. I was like, I was young, and I was like, I've never anything like this. I was all lightheaded and nauseous. I was like, I've never read, where was this? I haven't heard about this.
And to think that was what most went through, I don't know. And then the part where they cut his foot off, so he would never run again. Like things like that. They just don't happen in the children's book, which is good, right? Like you don't want to traumatize children, maybe, but yeah. Well, I'm just thankful I read this while I was still younger. I have to say too, like even in my history book, and we had a particularly poor history book as far as African American history is concerned, but they had about a paragraph about this size about slavery. And it said, in the South, slaveholders only owned on average about 6 slaves each, and most treated their slaves very well. And that was like about the extent of that. And then a little bit later, talked a little bit about Malcolm X and Rosa Parks, you know?
Did they even talk
Not
about
Malcolm X. I didn't mean Malcolm X. I meant Martin Luther King.
Yeah, they talk about Martin Luther King.
So this was a whole revelation to me, and the other books I read outside of my history.
And then you get like so attached to the character, right? You see him come through all this, and then you really feel it when his daughter is taken away, right? It's just like,
and it drops him.
And then like at the end, it's just like crazy because it comes all the way up to the author. So
and Alex Haley is so blessed that he was able to do that. Like most African Americans in this country can go back. Do you know if
it's his actual lineage or
it is? Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
It's true. It talks about it. I don't know if it was in the introduction. It talks about how he went back to Africa and he went back to the village. And
that would be so crazy to do.
Imagine if we could do that. Most of us can only go back to a couple greats, and that's about as far as it goes. There's no records.
I've tried on some different things to get. On my mom's side, I can go all the way back. We came over on the Mayflower on my mom's side.
That's crazy.
We was on Plymouth Rock. We were cracked up because the man who came over was an indentured servant. So one of my brothers was like, "What? We came over as slaves on both sides?"
On both sides. We got slaves on both sides. Yeah. I also thought I thought it was interesting about when I read it how they came from Muslim roots, or the people in Africa are Muslim. And for a long time, I just thought, oh, well, Muslim after reading this book, was just a religion there. And then we found out, remember last spring or last winter, about how actually there was a sub-Saharan slave trade.
Yeah.
And that people were brought to and from Middle Eastern countries as slaves.
Times as long as the
transatlantic. And that's how the Muslim religion became so prevalent there. I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, like you can read in the book, it talks about all the slaves crying out to Allah and all that different stuff. I thought that was interesting.
And how people talk about, we cried out to Jesus and Jesus didn't save us. Well, it looks like Allah didn't save them either if you're going to go down that path.
Yeah, like if we're going to compare like that, then, it is what it is, right?
And, again, both, the Muslim religion was definitely brought by slavery. But actually, if you study history, there were Christians in Africa long before the transatlantic slave trade began.
Absolutely.
But that's a whole nother podcast for a whole nother time that we should talk about.
And that is one of my soapboxes, so get ready for that one.
Anyway, everybody, I think, in the whole world should have to read Roots. And maybe you're not a big reader, and yes, this is a very thick book, but...
You could probably get it on Audible.
You gotta, and if the movie's any good, we haven't seen it, right? But you gotta be able to get a hold of this history, because I feel like this is the book that I've read that has been able to get me as close as possible to just imagining, picturing, and just realizing, inside of myself, really the horrors of slavery. There's generational trauma. If you read this, you get it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I was rereading it today, and I was like, I know this is in somebody's DNA. That messed stuff up in the gene pool.
Absolutely. And those sharks. I mean, have you ever read about that? How the sharks in that part of the Atlantic are still, prefer human flesh? It changes sharks' DNA.
Nope.
Because of the amount of people that jumped overboard.
Nope, I had no
clue.
So
messed up. And the amount of people that were thrown over, because so many died, right, in the horrible conditions. Anyway.
That sounds pretty crazy.
Roots is the way to go if you are just needing to, especially if you just want a crash course about, okay, so what happened? You get a little bit about Africa. You get, the people that came straight from there. And then we go through time. You get just a boom. This is kind of what slavery was like. And there's, different stories, different experiences. Anyway, Roots definitely changed my life. I'm so glad we read it.
Thank you for being here today. Y'all know what time it is.
Peace, love, and hair grease.